All right. Welcome, everybody, to the second May the North Be With You. I want to start off by thanking everyone who came, and especially lots of people came from far away to this, which is like, for us who organized it, it's, it means a lot to us that people put the effort and the money to come out here. We got lots of people from the US and the UK and all over Canada. And we really appreciate you guys coming out, so thanks a lot. So just in case not everyone knows everyone else, because we kind of know each other from the internet and you probably don't know people's real faces. I'm Mike Freeman. I'm owner of Fourth Moon Toys and one of the organizers here. Then we also have Chris Porteous over here, who's our AV video everything super guru. Toby Black in the back over there, who also one of the organizers. And I don't know, is Todd around or is he at the team? He's back there hiding. But Todd, yeah. So the four of us have been really, working for several months trying to put this together and hoping that it works. And then there's a few other people too that we really need to thank. Bill Kennedy, who's also been a huge help and is manning the raffle table over there. Thanks a lot, Bill. Clint, there's Clint back there, who's made, dozens of amazing custom Star Wars figures. There's a couple up on the raffle table, and then he'll have more at room sales tonight. But they're really amazing, hand cast and everything like that, and they look great. So we're really appreciative to Clint for doing that. And I also want to thank Jim, who's on the panel here with us, because he's been a huge supporter of May the North and getting the word out and helping us out with stuff. The first May the North was last year, and it really came out of traveling down to the US and going to shows there, or going to state meetups of different clubs down in the States, and seeing how people would come together, collectors of Star Wars stuff, but not just to buy stuff, to actually just like hang out and talk about Star Wars stuff and learn about Star Wars stuff. Everything we had seen in Canada before had just been, your standard pay $10, come into a toy show, walk around for half an hour and leave. And we really wanted to mimic what was being done in the States and create something where people actually got together and yes, definitely bought stuff, and hopefully some cool stuff comes out tonight at room sales, but just also the social aspect of it and getting to know people in real life that you've been talking to on the internet for years. So that's what this weekend is about, and thank you everyone for coming. All right, so on this first panel here, we're going to be talking to two guys who actually got to work on the toys we all collect and find out a little bit about what actually went on both at the conceptual phase and then at the factory packaging phase, and kind of hopefully some cool stories that you didn't know about how our favorite toys were made. And Jim's been nice enough to answer my request to come up here and talk about kind of the prototyping phase, because that was kind of the missing link in this. So the first, so we have Jim Swearingen here, who was conceptual designer at Kenner back in '77 when the Star Wars license came to Kenner. We have Gord Warren here, who managed production at Irwin Toys, or Kenner Canada, and worked throughout the years with a lot of the Star Wars stuff. And then Jim McCallum, who has written the book on Canadian Star Wars collectibles and Irwin Toys. And I hear Fourth Moon Toys may have some of these available for sale later on. And Jim will certainly autograph those for free.
Yes, I will. I've been living off this thing for 25 years, so why not?
Yeah. And the ones we have were actually printed for May the North last year, so they're a great high quality print of it. Yeah. Yay, Jim. All right. So I'm going to start with you, Jim, because you were kind of there at the earliest days of
Yeah.
Kenner's interaction with the Star Wars universe. When did you first start at Kenner?
I started at Kenner in 1972 when I graduated from college.
Okay.
I was fresh out. I'd worked for a small toy company called Rainbow Crafts that was owned by General Mills, as was Kenner. And when I graduated, they had merged the two companies. So I started out on Play-Doh and Spirograph and all kinds of little stuff like that. But yeah, it was my first job out of college.
Cool. And what was the toy industry landscape kind of like there? Because you had Mattel and Hasbro as kind of the big guys. How did Kenner fit in?
Yeah, we were a middle-sized company.
Yeah.
We were part of the General Mills had bought Parker Brothers, Kenner, Rainbow Crafts, MPC model kits, and Lionel.
Okay.
And they were forming the toy group.
But all those companies were kind of still functioning individually?
Yeah, except for Kenner and Rainbow Crafts, but they'd been rolled together. And it was kind of a middle-sized company, not too small, not too big, but we had the biggest successes were, Play-Doh and Spirograph, those kind of classic toys that they've been making for years. They started out as the Steiners that owned the company at the time. They started out making pine tar soap. And then they moved into making candy pellets that were in glass jars. So they, progressed into, I think the first kind of commercial toy they did was bubble guns and stuff, shooting bubbles and stuff. But they'd been growing, and then they were merged, and I think Play-Doh was a big deal for them. So, but it was fun. I as a kid, as a 20, I was in my 20s by that point. Working in a toy company is just too much fun. It really was. As a designer, not so much of the business, because we didn't have to worry too much about the business. It was more, what do we do today, and that kind of stuff. When
you were in school, did you know you wanted to work in the toy industry?
No. I had lined up an ID job, an industrial design job with a company called Richardson Smith in Columbus, Ohio, that was an ID firm. They were doing stereo equipment, appliances, and all that, which is kind of traditional ID stuff. But they, when they found out what my draft number was, they dropped me like a hot potato.
Oh, really?
I was 62. None of you people have to deal with that, but I was 62 out of 365, so I was ripe for being drafted. So my boss at Kenner at that time, he said, I don't care what your number is. If you want to work for us, come and work for us. We'll work it out later. And as it turned out, I didn't get drafted and just kept on with the toy business.
Oh,
so
kind of lucky there.
Yeah, it was great.
And I think probably everyone in this room's probably seen the toys that made us, probably multiple times, where we see a lot about you in those early days. But you were the first one to read the Star Wars script at Kenner?
Yeah, that they had shown. I understand. I wasn't there. Dave Okada and gosh, I wiped his name. Craig Stokely had seen some clips. And they brought back the script. And by that time, luckily, Mattel and Hasbro and Mego and everybody had passed on it.
Yeah.
Finally got to Kenner at Toy Fair. And they brought it back and said, here, who wants to read this? And I was like, that's mine. Because I knew I had read about Star Wars in Starlog magazine. And 4 paragraphs said that George Lucas was working on a new movie called Star Wars. And it was like kismet, it was like things lined up, and it was like, that's my baby. And luckily I got to convince Craig and the rest. Now they kind of think it was their idea, but
was it hard to convince though? Like that you read the script, did you come in the next day?
No, it wasn't easy. Prelim design, where I worked, every week we would make presentations about toys that we were looking at, materials, and looking for stuff. And we had done $6 Million Man, and movies were like, everybody else had said, it's a movie, it's science fiction, It's opening in May. We can't do it. There was no way. And my part of my job was to convince them every week. We kept showing stuff to them. It was like, okay, here's another thing we could do with Star Wars, or how about this? And we did that for weeks and weeks. And then they finally were like, okay, we'll think about it better. We had this whole thing, a whole kind of a library of stuff. And Dave Okada and I went out to 20th Century Fox to kind of show them a little bit of what we were doing to make them more comfortable that this little kind of medium-sized toy company in Cincinnati could do the project. Because it was, for them, they were, there's all this dynamics between the two companies and between Lucas and 20th Century Fox that we were a little unaware of, but we were like, I was living and breathing Star Wars for months, and then got to do all the traveling stuff. I got to, go to 20th Century Fox and see, sit down with Alan Ladd across the table and show him stuff that we were thinking about.
Yeah.
And that, at that time I was 27. That was like pretty heady stuff to go out to Hollywood and show stuff. It was like, what fun.
And so that was mostly concept drawings and stuff?
Yeah, the first was all on boards. The first board, there were 11 characters that we picked out. And then there was an X-Wing and a TIE fighter. And we animated the board so we can have the X-Wing's wing. And the TIE fighter, the panel it popped off so we could demonstrate stuff like that. Showed them all kinds of, I had a Death Star game we didn't make that was a sphere that spun around, and then you had an X-Wing on a spring-loaded arm, and you try and hit the target as it came around.
Yeah.
So, and then it would blow up. So we were just throwing out ideas at that point, and everybody was trying, start talking about contracts and things.
Yeah.
Which I didn't care about. I was just making toys. It was like, what else can we do? And we do the normal stuff,
And so those first 11, what was the 12th one after for the first 12?
Well, it ended up being the Death Star Commander.
Oh, okay. And so at that time, you really just had the script. How did you decide on those first 11? Did you have concept drawings from?
No, we got a book of black and white photos.
Oh, okay.
From the live action, because that was all done.
Yeah.
They were working on special effects. So that was in Marchish, I think.
Okay.
And they were still shooting special effects in California. So that was, but we were working from a script and a list of stuff. Oh. And I tell people, I have my list that I read where Governor Tarkin was about, I think it was 13.
Oh, yeah,
but somebody
right
else,
on the edge.
The marketing guy, it was his fault that the Death Star Commander. And it's kind of amazing that even after that Governor Tarkin never got, it took him so long to get, and then they put him in a game. It was like... Yeah.
Or here at May the North, where you can get a Clint-made Tarkin or Tarkin in slippers figure. Yeah. And so at that point, you had kind of decided on the scale of going down to the smaller figures?
Well, the rendering, the figures I wish I still had the board. So far it isn't. But they were about 2.5 inches. It was just, when we first saw it, when I'm 27, I'm thinking, I'm looking at being a 7-year-old. What do I want to do? And reading the script, I want to do the dogfight. It's like the script says, the X-Wing and the TIE fighter are flying around. And it's like, that's what and to do it at the scale of $6 Million Man at 12 inches, this X-Wing would have been bigger than this platform. So we were looking for something that was a size that we could work with. And so that it was first shown that way, and we really hadn't established the scale. And I know that you're talking about the Bernie Loomis thing, picking, make it this big. The good thing was that when I was mocking them up, that the Fisher-Price Adventure people are this big. So somewhere in between, I never was in the meeting that Bernie said, make him this big. It was happy happy coincidence that
Yeah.
I could find figures. It was just, that's what we based the first kit bash models on. It was handy.
Yeah, and it worked. And
Really handy.
Yeah, and it really kind of changed the whole toy industry for a long time.
Yeah, because $6 Million Man and G.I. Joe, the behemoths were all 12 inches tall. We actually shrank G.I. Joe to the right scale.
And then you got to head out to, was it called Industrial Light and Magic at the time?
Yep.
And I think for anyone in this room, that would be the most amazing thing ever. And I know you were already a fan. So
it was really amazing. I'm still 27, but I went to LA all by myself. Now, I'd gone out with Dave Okada, but all by myself. I used a map to get to Universal Studios.
A paper map?
A paper map. Imagine that. And I actually made it. They said everything at that time was 20 minutes away, which is never true, but they would always say, well, we're about 20 minutes from the airport. It never was, but especially when you don't know where you're going. But I got to drive up, and the guy at the shack, there's the shack by the gate, and guy in the uniform comes out with a clipboard, and it's just like the movies. I was like, he said, oh yeah, you're okay. Lucasfilm, they're in Bungalow, and I don't know the Bungalow number, but you can park over there. And that's when I met Charlie Lippincott and Carol Wakarska, the marketing people, and they treated me really great. I went in, and they had all these blueprints and drawings and stuff for me to look at. And so I'm going through and picking out, this is, I need this and this and this and this. All these things would arrive later on by mail, no FedEx. But, and we went to lunch at the commissary, and there's people in costumes, and it's like, I'm just like living the movie life. It was just so incredible. And then Charlie said, do you want to see dailies? So I went out to the ILM at Van Nuys. We drove out, and it just like you've seen pictures of it. It's just a warehouse building, basically. And so I go in, and there's X-Wings and the Death Star on model stands, and there's all this stuff that I've been reading about.
And had you done, like, what phase were you in your design process at that point? Had you made a physical prototype yet of like X-Wing or TIE Fighter? Or
we were mocking them up.
Okay, so you were starting.
We
to
didn't
work
have
on
models yet, but because we were still waiting for material from them. They weren't as prepared for us as
you wanted them to be.
Because we didn't have the blueprints yet. So that's what I was going through.
And they were behind and working hard to get the movie out.
Oh yeah, they were still. Right? It's like this is like, this is important, but not that important. We really need to get the movie finished. And I think I went back just recently to look at the making of Star Wars, and they were behind the gun trying to get things done. So I was just kind of this character. But I got to go and see that stuff. And, I went in for the dailies, the room with all these ugly old couches. They look like somebody's grandma might have, or some Sears catalog or something, with lots of flowers and plaid and all that. And I went in and sat in the room with a whole bunch of the crew. And the lights went down, and the screen kind of lit up, but only in one corner. I told people,
because it was just
a couple blinking lights.
That effect, yeah.
They were doing some effect thing. The lights went back up. They all like, great. So I was left going, I didn't see one TIE fighter except out in the hallway. So yeah, so that was my dailies. But to be in that same room and figure that, how many times George and all the other people, like Christian, it's like, to be able to sit there and go, I did that. I think they have a fancier screening room now.
Probably. They got a little more money now. So I guess you went back and finished off the kit bashing. If you could briefly explain what exactly kit bashing is, because it's kind of a term we throw around all the time. Well,
on the figures, it was we went out and I bought a bunch of Fisher-Price figures, and with my sculpting skills with an X-Acto knife and body putty, kind of mocked them up. And then we had a great model shop. Preliminary had a group of guys that were picked to be our model shop because they had great skills. And like the first lightsaber was we took some figures, they carved out the backs of the arms, and we had a spool of monofilament fishing line that fed up through the arm, and there was a hilt in his hand, and then you would pull it out and then you could reel it back in. That's how Preliminary showed it. When we turned it over, they couldn't find a material. We were looking for a material that had a memory that was straight because monofilament is not. It's manufactured as spiral.
Yeah.
So we couldn't find a material, and then the engineers are going, we got to do a lightsaber somehow. And they did that double telescoping thing, the much sought after stuff. So that kind of, we mocked things up. They weren't necessarily pretty. We used them for presentations, but they weren't near production. And then that got turned over to production engineers and designers. So they actually did the sculptures. Like Steve that was here last year was one of the sculptors that did figures. And
Stephen Geddes.
Yeah. But we had that was a production area. We weren't responsible.
Were you
for
just
that.
removed from that process, or would they still be kind of coming back to you and being like, "Hey, we're thinking this"? Or
I was more the liaison between us and Lucasfilm.
Okay.
So I'd be sending long lists of things that I needed, and having met some of the people, I knew what I was looking for, like sound effects and things.
So you knew who to talk to.
I'd send an email to Ben Burton and say, I need a TIE fighter sound.
Oh, wow.
Even though our sounds were made with the Mylar reed on a Mabuchi motor, it was not nearly as authentic. But I got the recordings, and
oh wow,
but I got to we were looking for more turnarounds on figures and things so that the sculptors could work for them. So I got to do the back and forth between Charlie and Carol.
Okay.
Asking for stuff.
Yeah. And then when the figures were presented to Lucasfilm, when they got to see the actual kit bash prototypes you worked on and stuff, did you go to that meeting? You were there?
No, I don't actually. No, I think we didn't send anything to them. They got a lot of photographs and things. I think I don't even remember. It's like, I'm sure stuff went back and forth.
Yeah.
But we were still trying to sell it in to our management and to sales. So that they didn't last very long there. But the way back when, you didn't send a FedEx package.
Yeah.
There were people that would, like once the marketing people were assigned, they would take waxes and stuff to California for approvals and stuff. And then they would come back and make changes if they needed to.
So they would physically fly out with the figures.
Yeah, you had to. Yeah. That was faster than, I think we might have had a fax machine, but you couldn't send anything overnight. There was.
Yeah, well, and the wax sculpts would be so fragile too, right?
There were a number of times when wax sculptures were injured on the way in and out, so. Not so much on Star Wars, but other things. So,
do you have a favorite first 12 character yourself?
C-3PO.
Really? Why C-3PO?
I think he's a little like me. Not very assuming, but he's a real, was a part of things. And he was. I just like the character, and he's actually Anthony Daniels. Oh no, he'll never remember it. I ran into him once.
Oh yeah.
Way back. I've seen him since then, but my first encounter was in passing in California when they were doing the TV special.
Oh really?
Yeah, he was. I don't know why, but I was out there to see the sets and kind of get a feel for the Christmas special, as if we would do something with it. Yeah. And then he was there, and somebody said, "Hey, this is Anthony Daniels. He plays C-3PO." And I was like, wow. So
I made you as a figure.
But now last time I saw him was in Germany, and he had no idea who I was. So.
Yeah. And when did you first get to see Star Wars on the big screen?
I was invited. I went to the first market research screening on May 1st in San Francisco.
So it's about 3 weeks before it
was like nobody else wanted to go. I was like, I've been doing this for a few months. I'm going to go see this movie. So I got to see it twice. I got to see it with this. That screening can never happen again. It was electric because it's all these people that were invited, but they didn't know what they were going to see. And to be in there with the first scene with the destroyer coming overhead and the subwoofers, and it was amazing. And then at the end, when the Death Star blew up, people were out of their seats cheering. It was like, you can't imagine. It was, and that was the only, I say this all the time, it was the only virgin audience.
Yeah.
You know, a bunch of people that were invited to see a movie to do a market research thing. And they were like, they had no idea what they were seeing. And the magic of it was just, it'll never happen again. Because then after that, there was press screening, and it was all from then on. It was just a little bit tainted.
Yeah,
you know, people were expecting a good movie, but that first people, when they were like, you know, Star Wars pops on the screen when they're expecting something else, was just astounding.
And did you know walking out of that like,
oh yeah,
the toy line's going to be huge, this is going to be big?
Well, I don't know, but I knew the movie was going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
I was pretty confident that we made the right choice.
Because it was a big risk for Kenner, right?
Yeah, and opening in May, the toy business didn't run on, you know, a full year. Christmas was, you know, we did Thanksgiving to Christmas was the biggest time of year. You know, things are pre-sold, but yeah, it was couldn't imagine that it would be. Most people were. It's opening in May, and we got 9 months. And it was not in the bag like you'd think.
And then you guys famously did sold the envelope in stores. Mail away for the first 4 figures. Gord, do you remember in Canada any talk about whether or not you guys were going to copy the States, or whether there even was an opportunity to do early bird mail-in sort of thing here?
I'm not certain, you know, because you got to remember, I was a guy that made the stuff. I didn't go upstairs and sit in on these planning meetings and things like that. But, you know, when we heard that Kenner got the license, I said, wow, wonder what this is going to do to us. And I was amazed that Kenner went all in and started producing items before the movie even came out. That was completely opposite of the way that had happened previously, in that the movie came out, and if it was a success, some toy company would come along and make 1 or 2 items for it and live off the movie. Kenner came along, and all these things are coming out, and Star Wars hadn't been released. In fact, honestly, the first item we ever produced was a land speeder. I looked at that and I said, if this is Star Wars, it's going to be a real dud. I could not see any play value in the land speeder. And then a couple of weeks later, all of a sudden we started getting all the figures coming in. And I said, oh, now I can see where this is going to go. Because the land speeder by itself, you couldn't do anything with it. But the land speeder with figures, you could play with it and have fun. And after that, things just skyrocketed.
The demand from stores was just explosive?
Well, the demand was more than we could produce. And it was more than the figures that were allocated to us. And so they had to go to the different retailers and say, yes, I know you ordered 5,000, 10,000 of this. We can't supply that. You know, we've got to be fair to everybody else in the rest of the country. And that didn't go over too well. And realistically, it turned around to bite Irwin in the butt years later.
Oh, really? Because the retailers were still kind of peeved?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they held that grudge?
They have a long memory.
All right. Jim, to kind of wrap up your conceptual sort of thing, that part of the process, to us outside the toy industry, you've talked a bit about it, but what was your day-to-day job? What did you come in each morning and do and that initial part of the toy making process?
Well, it depends on what the product is, obviously, but our charge was to look at. Now, on Star Wars, it's a little different because we knew where the direction we were taking. But our charge was to look for new ideas, all the time. Look
at trends or
look at everything. We had in a chemistry lab. They'd come up with something, and then you'd have to figure out what
to do.
How would you make it a toy? So we would be doing that all the time.
Uh-huh.
When $6 Million Man came in, how do we do $6 Million Man? And the team would get together and we'd talk about it and look at some video and try to translate it from the TV screen to a toy. So we did that a lot. Then there was outside inventor stuff. We'd look at their stuff and evaluate it, try and do some preliminary costing and stuff. So it really was a team process. We had designers, engineers, some model makers, and then we traded off stuff. So at the same time, towards my tenure on Star Wars was the first 2.5 movies. I had left in 1979 and a half, left that department. But in that time, I worked on Strawberry Shortcake at the same time as working on Star Wars.
Yeah.
So it wasn't all, when you get to production design, it was the boys' toys and the girls' toys and creative play groups. In prelim, we worked on everything. So everything from Star Wars. And then I ended up in marketing Strawberry Shortcake. So I went to the dark pink side.
Yeah. How did that transition come about to work in the marketing department?
I had a disagreement with management.
and that's how they punished you?
I had a new, Dave Okada and Bernie Loomis left Kenner and went to New York to start the fun group. And they gave Dave's job to another fellow, and he hired a guy that I didn't like and didn't get along with, and I went to Mattel for an interview. And when I got back, found out that they already knew I was at Mattel.
Oh, really?
It was like, wait, I just got there. I just got back. And they offered me a job in marketing. Oh, okay. So I thought, what the heck? I'll just try it out. So I did 5.5 years of Strawberry Shortcake.
Cool. And so beyond the first 12 and the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter, what other Star Wars toys did you work on after that?
Gosh. Directly? I didn't like the land speeder was Mike Connors, who's now passed away. And Mark Boudreau did all the Millennium Falcons. And we worked together on all those projects. Now they've both passed. All the model makers are gone, and all the engineers. So the only thing left are the designers. Dave Okada is still alive. He's in his 90s. But
did you guys know you would make a Millennium Falcon right from the beginning? Like,
yeah,
it's a pretty huge toy, right?
The first one was made out of foam core. Mark Boudreau was a master of foam core at the time. He had just graduated from UC when he got hired. And we all flew, it was like, what are we calling out features and what we want to do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was pretty early. It was probably the fall of '77. He was starting on Millennium Falcon.
Okay.
And we were, part of it was we turned a lot of that stuff over and then waited for the movie to happen. So we were, everybody got to see the movie at the end of May, and it was. So things turned around. The prelim group would turn to other projects and things. and then identify new stuff as we came along.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot. So that's kind of the conceptual phase of things, and that's what Jim worked on. And then Jim, you're going to help us understand kind of where it went from there, right? So it would go from the
I texted you 3 days ago asking what you wanted me to talk about. I'm still up waiting for the reply.
Speak up.
I know, and it's fun to be up here talking to an audience where there may be some people who know a whole lot more than we do about certain aspects of things. But I guess was wax sculpting the first kind of step after on a figure? Let's say it was sent from you to engineering.
Yeah, we'd go to engineering and design, and then they would. We had a sculpting group, some of the most talented sculptors in the world. The engineers would develop the buck. They would build an armature. The simple articulation on the first figures, it was just single plane, neck, shoulders, hips, and the model shop would build a buck that had that built into it, and then they would start the sculpting. First rough, and then there were a few things like C-3PO, both the small one and the 12-inch were done in acetate. They were actually done in a different material, but
okay.
And then they went through the process. While the engineers are developing the tooling plans and stuff, the sculptors are modifying things. It was really more complicated than just doing a sculpture because they had to shrink into everything.
Okay.
The engineers are determining what materials to use, and they all shrink at different rates when you mold them. Mm-hmm. So they had to build different shrinks into the arms and head and legs than in the body, and then figure that all out. And the sculptures, they used micrometers and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a little easier now because you can actually, it's all done 3D and they can adjust for that. But the sculptors at that time were, it's a little part art and part science because you know what you're doing. And then they'd go through a process of rubber molds and casting hard copies. Hard copies went to the Orient, tools were cut. Mm-hmm. So it was we kept, they had to keep all the parting lines flat. The first figures, the limited articulation is partially so that you can keep the molds really simple. Mm-hmm. No slides and tricky stuff. You had to make it all open one shot.
Yeah.
So, and the engineers were always working on tooling plans, and some of the Millennium Falcon tools are huge.
Oh, I imagine.
And that was all done in the model shop. The Millennium Falcon, the X-Wing, and TIE Fighter are all done in patterns built by model makers.
Okay.
So they're built, the first ones were mahogany and
I've seen pictures of those. It's amazing.
They're just beautiful sculptures.
Mm-hmm. I guess hard copies are, you see wax sculpts in collectors' collections, but hard copies are kind of the start of what you see more in collectors of prototypes and that type of thing. Do you have anything you want to say, Jim, about the hard copies of that process?
Yeah, the hard copies, sometimes they can be painted or unpainted kind of thing. Jim, I was going to ask that. I'm assuming the painting was so they had a gist of what the figure was going to look like at the end and would get what it would look like in production per se.
Well,
the first hard copies would be just blank. They just wanted to get started and get a gist and then paint it so they could swatch it properly.
They were used for presentations.
Right.
Yeah, because the first models were all. I don't think there was I don't think there were any hard copies of the actual. We never made figures for presentation with the telescoping.
Right.
The first models probably never had that kind of stuff, but they use them for paint samples and sending things to the Orient, the specs.
And a lot of stuff that Kim Simmons was doing a photograph was hard copies.
That was all
than just
copies.
regular figures, right? Exactly.
Yep.
So those hard copies get sent off to the factories and stuff. And what's the next step over there with the
to create the tooling die?
Okay, from the hard copy, basically.
Yes, yeah, pretty much so. Do the tooling aid and stuff like that, and get it ready. And like Jim said, they know that this stuff's going to shrink a little bit, and so it was
Is that where first shots come in?
And then first
that?
shots are after that. Exactly. Once this steel tool die has been made, they do the first shots. They inject it with plastic, to see how it's going to actually look and how
Like
the
production
dye,
plastic, the same plastic they'll use,
exactly, or whatever they have around. That's why some first shots are a different color, right? The first shots, because they just want to see how the dye turned out, and stuff like that. So yeah.
Jim, I don't know if you're like, sonic welding is one of the terms we hear a lot as collectors, and I remember when I first started, it just sounds really cool, and then looked up what it is, and it is actually pretty cool. But could you maybe speak to what sonic welding is, or I don't know,
Which Jim?
Yeah, ask Mr. Swearingen. Ask Mr. Swearingen on that.
Yeah, like so sonic welding is how they put the figures together.
Yeah, it's just what it sounds like. The bodies are made out of ABS, and they basically vibrate them together. There's an overlap, and they're designed so that when you start vibrating them and push them together, they weld themselves together. Now, because the arms are a different material, they don't melt at the same rate. So
Okay.
yeah, so it's again the science of putting things together, but.
So
rather
you
than
put all the
gluing them-
parts together into like kind of like a mold that would
Yeah.
hold them together.
I've never actually seen it done. but
Sonic it.
Well,
Yeah, he might know.
Sonic, yes, we did. Sonic sealing, basically, you have a bottom cavity, you put all the parts in, and the top comes down, and it's ultra high frequency vibration. But the way the part is designed is usually there's a pin to hold it together at different places around the piece, and then a fine little line around the edge of the piece, so that when you press them together and vibrate, this little line, this little ridge, melts and holds it together.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little piece of
It's-
technology.
yeah.
Use sound waves to.
And the great thing about it is that when you're finished with it, it's cool, you can handle it, and it's completely sealed.
And yeah, knowing how they've held up over 40 odd years,
It shows you the procedure works.
yeah. So Jim, when they do the first shots, what is that? What's going on there before we get to an actual like figures dropping off the line for production?
Again, it's to make sure the tooling die is ready to go, and once it's all approved by everyone and it's sent from the vendor, and someone usually checks it out and gives it the approval, and away they go. Once that's the final process before they start mass producing these things.
And timelines must have been a lot longer back then, because if you have a factory in Asia creating these first shots, it could take, I imagine, weeks for them to cross over to the States and to get approved and all that sort of stuff.
Back in the old days, it was 52 weeks. It was kind of
that was
it was
your
kind of the
schedule?
basic thing.
But would they send people over to like the Smile and Cater factory, or would it get sent from the Orient to the States first, or would someone go to
Well, Kenner had people in the Orient,
yes.
so they would do the first step, and then they'd send a batch to.
Okay, so they didn't have the power of approval to say, yeah, this is, go ahead
No,
with it.
They would have gone through, and then at some point they would send them to Lucasfilm. That's the next step. Before they put the copyrights on, they had to see them before they put the
Right.
Did
notice on.
Lucasfilm ever have many notes? Do you know? Or
Well,
was
they'd
it-
seen everything for, they'd seen all
rounds
the
and rounds in
steps. So
advance, yeah.
it was rare that they would, except for mistakes. I mean, there were plenty of those. Variations.
Variations, as we call them. Yeah,
Is that what they call them?
variants? Yeah.
But they never directly rejected a figure saying, no, you're going to have to do
No.
something different with that. We don't like this
The
at all."
example is the blue snaggletooth.
Right.
I mean, he made it all the way through to production. So.
Right.
So a lot of people signed off on that.
Yeah. So the blue snaggletooth is just one of those rare, like, oops, big oops. But
All right. Well, let's move now kind of to Gord's territory and talk about Irwin Toys in Canada a bit and kind of production, packaging, and getting stuff out to consumers. Gord, when did you start at Irwin Toy?
I started there in 76.
Oh,
And I started off at the other plant and then moved to Hannah Avenue.
mm-hmm.
And then I was in quality control. And then I moved into the manufacturing position.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's lots of stories behind that. And I think I've told it to everybody before. And I said it earlier, I was amazed at how quick Kenner was to react and start producing items before the movie even came out. The way we made the toys was the big plastic parts,
Mm-hmm.
we would contract mold them in Toronto. And the small little accessories, the molds were run in Cincinnati, and the parts were shipped up to us because it was too expensive to be shipping all these big pieces of plastic. So our license with Kenner was that we had a window that we were allowed to use the tools. And when those tools came in, we ran them night and day just to try and get as much out as we could because no one realized at that time everything was pre-sold.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we made had already been sold. And so if we could get an extra 100 pieces out of that tool before we had to send it back, then that was a bonus.
Yeah. So can you describe kind of like Jim did, like what was your day-to-day when the Star Wars started coming out? Like what were you responsible for in your job exactly?
Well, when Star Wars first started, I went down to Cincinnati and met with the manufacturing people there to learn how they assembled the toys, to see the machines, to see the fixtures and everything they had, and make notes on it and come back to Toronto. And my job was to convert it to the equipment we had.
Okay.
And get the fixtures made for doing it with the equipment that we had. And then when the fixtures were made, and I originally had the concept of how it was going to be put together, and we put and I'm just going on just one product.
Yeah.
We would put all the items on the production line, and there was a sequence that you had to do in order to build the toy.
And you would have learned that from kind of how Kenner was
Yes.
doing it in Cincinnati?
Yes. And then I would show the supervisory people how to put it together. One of them was my wife.
I was just going to say, you met your wife at Kenner, or at Irwin Toys.
Yes. And so we ended up, I would show them how to do it, and then I'd turn and walk away because they would change it to the way that worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given a big leeway. They didn't care how we put it together as long as it got together.
Yeah.
There was so much pressure on trying to get this stuff out because, there were such big sales.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, the group of people here looking at Star Wars, they look at how it is, how nice it is to play with, how great it is, what fun they have with it. Not me. I looked at my favorite toy was something that went together quickly. I could get it packaged and get it out before they started yelling at me.
And most of the Star Wars ones weren't that?
No. Millennium Falcon, I hated that toy. You got to remember, this is a massive piece of plastic, and you had to put it on a fixture, and it had this chipboard insert that you had to weave in and out around it, a printed insert, and push it into the holders, and then put the top on and wiggle that around so it caught the chipboard again and locked it in place. Then you put 4 screws on that, turned it over, and put 18 screws on the bottom. So the hardest part was wiggling it and lining up the chipboard again. And you couldn't push the ladies to do it faster because there'd be mistakes. It was just so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken apart just a handful of Millennium Falcons and put them together. I can't imagine trying to put out, like, would you remember even like how many in a day Falcons would you be able to put together?
Not enough.
No,
Certainly, no.
that's the truth.
But yeah, like how many people would you have
Okay.
working on a line at
Okay,
that time?
Valerie, how many do you think we did in a day?
About 1,000. So about 1,000 units a day. And how many people would you have working on that line to? About 25 to make 1,000 Falcons.
Then you
in a day.
can see how slow it was going. Where it's something like the X-wing fighter,
Yeah.
we ran a double line on it, 2 shifts, a day shift and an afternoon shift on it. That stuff was just pouring out, but it had all the sails.
Yeah.
And it could be assembled very quickly. The way it was designed, it was basically, it went in the fixture and it was held in one place and everything else went on top of it, and then you screwed it together.
Yeah.
So you weren't turning over and manipulating and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you only had about 4 or 6 screws on on that one. So on that floor, you're bringing together, I guess, a lot of disparate pieces, right? So
Yes.
as you mentioned, you would have small parts coming in from Kenner, from Cincinnati. The hulls are the big pieces. You guys would be working with local Toronto companies to mold those?
We did contract molding because it's difficult to envision a mold shop where 1 month you might be running 5 molds and 2 months later you'd be running 75 molds. So you couldn't invest that amount of money in a shop because we couldn't keep it utilized. And so the best thing was to go with contract molding.
And give you the flexibility for production there. And then the printed elements as well would be printed in Toronto, the box packaging.
They were all printed
inserts
locally.
and all that.
Yeah, they were all printed locally. We did all sorts of different things, and I know a few years ago you met Brenda, who was our French translator.
Yeah, she was at May the North last year.
And there were words that didn't translate correctly, so she made up words to fit in the French version so that it would look like it belonged there.
Yeah.
Because, you only had so much space to get something in.
Yeah, and the French is always longer.
Yes. And they wanted it the same size.
Yeah. I think that's really cool that that so many of these toys were actually manufactured right here in Toronto. Because besides the Snowspeeder, there's one Snowspeeder that has a Toronto country of origin copyright on the bottom. But I never personally thought that all the other toys were actually manufactured here in Toronto. I always just assumed they came from somewhere else.
Well, you see, if it says Kenner Canada on the bottom,
Yeah, the Snowspeeder I think is the only thing that
it was
that
our
has
tool.
it. Yeah, so you guys actually made
and
that. Yeah.
it will have Kenner Canada, under license on the bottom or engraved into it because those were our tools. It was, we were making so many of them that we made our own tools because we couldn't keep the Kenner tools long enough to get our product out.
That's pretty amazing. And then figures, though, were a completely different story, right? So those were obviously manufactured in Asia and packaged in Asia as well?
Yes, they were blister packed in Asia and they were shipped over in bulk. And then we took the figures and made them into an assortment with those big white boxes and the headers that you see sitting on the rack over there, and shipped them out. And we were pumping out so many figures in a day that we had an automatic sealing machine. And when they stopped for lunch, the sealing machine would kept going, sealing the cartons, because there was such a backup on the conveyor system to get it through. And it was just hectic.
Yeah.
Getting all the figures in, making sure that you get the correct assortment.
Yeah.
And packaging all this up, and there were white boxes and you couldn't get the boxes dirty.
Really? That's funny. And then, as you say, even the figures as well were all pre-sold, so they were all right out the door. Once they got in a box, they were put in the truck.
Everything was like that. There was only a few Kenner toys that I remember that were like that. Do you remember Stretch Armstrong?
Oh, yeah.
Stretch Armstrong would come in a container at our back door. We would unload the container straight onto the line, pack them, and putting it into a shipping, going to shipping, and they'd be out the door before the container was unloaded.
Oh, really? So just like straight through the building and at the other
it
end.
was,
Yeah.
it was the same thing. That was, a big demand, but that was a short-lived demand. Nothing like Star Wars.
Yeah. So Irwin had already been working with Kenner before Star Wars came out, right?
Yes, all sorts of different things. Easy bake oven. My wife remembers that.
Fondly?
Yeah,
Fondly?
Well, it got her a job. And and you mentioned Spirograph. I remember running that, and Play-Doh, and all sorts of different things. I didn't realize at the time the amount of fun that I was having. Well, looking back on it, we remember all the good times we have. I don't remember all the pressure and people coming down. My boss kept telling me there's no extra days till Christmas and things like that. But at the end of the day, I enjoyed my time at Irwin.
Well, you met your wife there, and you weren't the only one, right?
When some of us get together, we start talking about different people that met and married at Irwin, and we're up over 21 couples so far. It was a real family company. Like even the president and the head of the sales, they both met their wives there.
Yeah, and so yeah, it was a fun place to work. Canada had some interesting production differences and packaging differences, and those things are now kind of the grails for collectors and hugely sought after, and we've got a few down there. So I wanted to ask you about a few of these, and I think we realize we're big, huge nerds who care way more about this than anyone else does. So if you do not remember anything about one of these things, don't feel bad, because that would be normal. But one of the first ones was Irwin Toy worked with Tall Toys out of Australia with the land speeder, for instance. You see both the Cincinnati country of origin land speeder and the Tall Toys country of origin with the stickers the kids had to apply themselves. You see both of those come up in Canada. What was Irwin's relationship with Tall Toys in Australia?
Irwin had a good relationship with Tall Toys. When the Irwin brothers, Mac and Arnold, decided that they had to start planning ahead and what the company is going to do when they retired, they took 3 people and started training them to be taking over the company. One was George Irwin, one was Scott Irwin, and one was Paul Griffiths, someone from outside the family. And they sent Scott Irwin down to Tall Toys in Australia, and he worked there for 5 years. And at that time, Scott was heavily involved with Kenner, and so he went down there and he was helping them work out. And so we had a relationship in that we shipped tools back and forth to them. Okay.
So do you think those land speeders were made with Tall Toys tools in Canada, or because they wouldn't have, it'd be too expensive to have made them in Australia and ship them all the way over here?
They would ship the tools, and it's the same thing. All the small parts we could get from Kenner. Yeah. And it's the big plastic parts that were expensive to ship.
Okay. Oh, so that's really interesting. That also tooling came from Australia. Do you have any memory of in Canada they released the Takara wind-up R2-D2?
No.
No, you don't know that one? Okay. Because, that wasn't released.
I didn't. Well, you got to remember, the things I remember are the stuff that we assembled. Yeah. Anything that was purchased or anything that was complete didn't come through the assembly floor, right over my head.
Because that just went back out the door, right? So speaking of things that then happened at Hannah, transition card backs, which I thought I had one here, but there's a couple up there. Those are a Canadian only thing. We were the only country that did that, and those were Empire Strikes Back carded figures that got a Return of the Jedi logo sticker put on, and then Akbar offer sticker both on the front and on the back. So those were obviously, you guys just had too many Empire figures sitting around when Return rolled around?
What they felt was a new movie came out and nobody's going to want the old product. And so they wanted to rebrand the product into the new movie. So we rented 3 Label Air label dispensers, and they built tools for them. And those labels were put on with an accuracy, I think, up to 1/100th of an inch.
Yeah, because they actually, like, on first glance, you don't notice that it's a sticker, really, unless you know what you're looking at.
And so what would happen is we'd have somebody at the top of the line, and if you look, the different figures, the labels are in the same spot. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so we would have someone at the top of the line unloading the boxes, the bulk boxes, and we would take and put the card into the label dispenser, and it would just blow a label on it and take it off and put it on the line. It would go down to the next one and get another label put on it, and down to the third one and get another label put on it. The big back labels were the slowest ones, so they were the first one to do.
Okay.
So you would do that one first.
And hard to line those up because they were the full width of the card back, right?
Actually, it wasn't.
No? Yeah.
They made such great, Label Air made such great fixtures that as long as you got the whole card in correctly straight,
Yep.
and it wouldn't trip the micro switch until the card was all the way in.
Okay.
And as soon as you trip the micro switch, it would come down and blow the label onto it.
Oh, okay, cool.
And they were great labeling machines, very few wrinkles.
And do you know about how many of those transition stickers you
I'm going to suggest about 50,000.
Okay. So
we were getting rid of our inventory.
yeah, and it's crazy that something that 50,000 is such a big number, and now they seem so rare compared to ones without stickers on it. It just speaks to the massive volume. Do you have any idea how many figures Canada created, or like or shipped out?
I haven't a clue. Like I could throw numbers out, but it would only be off the top of my head because we were packing 25 to 30,000 figures a day.
Wow.
And we were running 5 days a week, and we would run probably a couple of weeks before we'd run out of figures.
Yeah.
Am I close, Valerie? Yeah. Okay, I got the seal of approval. But the thing is that, whenever the figures came in, we didn't sit around. We ran them and got them out.
Chris, did you have something you want to mention there?
Yeah, so at this time, were you labeling prepackaged figures, or you just the cards?
Prepackaged figures.
Yeah, so those transitions were going on carded figures, not just card backs.
So you're getting them from Asia with the old logo.
Well, we already had them in stock.
So you were caught up with your orders at this point.
Well, they were afraid.
Otherwise, you were like behind.
No, they were afraid that with the old information
the Empire
on
logo on it,
The Empire Strikes Back, that they wouldn't sell. So the Empire figures didn't sell as well as the first ones. And so they said, okay, we got to get rid of these. So there's 2 ways of doing it. They can ship them back to the Orient and get them resealed, or we can label them. So labeling is the fastest and least expensive. So here it was.
Oh, that's cool. Do you remember the Canadian chipboard Death Star, which we've got one sitting over there? That wasn't released in the U.S. It was released in Canada, the UK, France, Australia. Do you know why Canada picked that to do and did 2 versions of the Death Star released?
It was obviously a marketing decision, and they, whoever did it liked the idea, and liked the idea that you could have something that you could put a lot of figures on and play with.
Yes, and it would be relatively cheap compared to the plastic toys.
And while we probably printed it here, it would be printed and packaged at the printer.
Oh, okay, so they would do the whole job.
They would do all the printing, stack them all, and put them into a box.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, great. Another famous Canadian variant is the skin wrap card backs, the black, plain black with the holes pumped into them. Can you? At first, why do those exist?
Well, skin packing is an old form of packaging, and it's a cheap form of packaging because you don't have to make blisters and you don't have to make tools and everything for the blister. It's just a sheet with a whole set of pinholes in it, and you lay the product on it, and then you heat up a piece of plastic, it comes over and it drapes over top of it, and there's a vacuum underneath, and it sucks it down onto the card. And it's a coated card, so when the plastic hits it, the hot plastic hits it, it seals to it. And then you take the sheet out of the vacuum former and you put it through a clicker machine where you have dies that clicker out the card. And it didn't matter what object was on because the dies would be higher than the object. And so it would just come down and clicker through the board. Mm-hmm. The reason that was done is usually it was a special that they'd agreed to with some store. They're going to have this, they're going to have that. It's going to be a special. And it wasn't big enough to run it in the Orient.
Yeah.
And so they basically just did it here, or they were behind getting something out. And so they would ship the bulk figures to us, and we would skin pack them in Hannah Avenue.
Mm-hmm. So you were doing that on other toy lines as well?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was a regular thing. Cool. And then the last, I guess, Canadian interestingness as it relates to the packaging and all that is in Canada, when I know when we've talked to other Irwin Toys executives about some of the special offer toys that came with figures, that was usually a way to appease some of their favorite retailers or give them something special so that, when the Sears catalog came out, you could only buy this version at Sears, and it gave them kind of something to talk about and a leg up. In the U.S., everything that came with figures in it, they came with bag-eat figures. Whereas in Canada, there's quite a few examples of the Dewback, for instance. And Jim, you probably know more than me, other ones that came with carded figures. So was that, would you have had those toys already boxed and packaged up, and word came down, we need a special one for Sears, go grab some figures and put them in? Or
well, normally what would be done is that, okay, we get told we're doing a special for Sears, or Simpson Sears.
Yeah, yes
for Canada.
Yeah
or for any of the other vendors, and we would basically take and pack that with a figure in it, and they would offer a figure that they had in stock, and they wouldn't have to worry about packing it or anything like that. And if the order came down after we'd already finished, yes, we would open the box and slide a figure in and seal it back up again and mark it special for Simpson Sears or whoever.
Okay. And you and I were talking about the Sandcrawler over there, which in Canada, the remote control Sandcrawler came out in a Empire Strikes Back package much later than it came out in the States, which was in Star Wars packaging. And we know that there was a lot of returns in the U.S. of the Sandcrawler consumer returns back, and that there was probably a lot of stock left over. And you mentioned that the laws in Canada differed when it came to refurbished toys. Can you talk about that?
Well, first off, I didn't have anything to do with that game because that came complete. But in Canada, you were allowed to refurbish a toy and sell it as brand new. Like we would buy some stuff from the US and it had refurbished stamped into it, and we would take another stamp with X's on it and cross out the refurbished. And they were allowed to sell it as first rate.
Mm-hmm. So that might have been kind of the reason why we ended up with so many of those later on. Well, I want to thank you very much, guys. I think we've learned some cool stuff. I want to open it up now if there are any questions, and I'll point you out, and then I'll repeat the question on the mic for the people out in TV land. Robert?
I just had a question, Gord. With all those pre-production orders coming in pre-orders, did any other toy lines suffer as a result of distribution?
So the question is, with the huge demand for Star Wars and all the orders that were already placed for that, did that affect the other toy lines that Irwin was trying to package up and put together at the same time?
Of course it did.
Yeah.
We only had 7 production lines, and at times we were running 2-3 items on the same production line. But we tried not to hold anything else back, but Star Wars got the priority. If I had 20 people coming in and I needed 15 for Star Wars, guess where they went? You know, there were things that Irwin would hire 30, 35, 40 people at a shot. And they would come in, and maybe 10% of them would leave by the first break. 50% wouldn't come back the next day because nobody realized that a toy factory is a high-speed assembly operation. You know, one of the ladies said, "I came to paint doll faces." We don't do that. If we're going to paint a doll face, we have a spray booth where you put the face in and you paint it, and it goes to another one and they put the eyes and everything in. So you don't stand there with a brush and paint faces.
That's cool. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I had a question for Jim S. It's about the second wave of figure and the holiday special. I've heard some talk that the Canteen aliens were kind of planned as a holiday special branded toy line. Do you have any recollection about the second wave and the aliens?
So the question is, the second wave of Star Wars characters, the Cantina aliens, which came out, I guess, closer to the holiday special and stuff. Was there a tie-in between those guys and the holiday special? Or do you know? Or how
I don't.
No.
That all the production after that, the first 12 was kind of off to marketing and production design people. So I don't. I saw this holiday special with the Salesforce once, and I've kind of blacked it out since.
But the Snaggletooth picture,
Yeah,
the
there's
photo
like-
art is from the holiday special. B. Arthur's somewhere to your left.
Yeah.
But
I'll have to watch it
Yes.
again, I guess. It's been long enough. But
Well,
I'm
watch
less
the
scarred.
cartoon. The rest is pretty skippable. But any other questions, Matt?
So you may not know or kind of recall this, Gord, but I found an example of a carded figure recently that had a transition sticker on it. But in the multi-packs that were made for the Sears Canada, anytime you would use like a double-sided tape to stick them all together before they went in the cardboard. So anytime that you peel those double-sided tapes apart, the litho would always tear. There's commonly a strip of the double-sided tape that proves evidence that it came out of a multi-pack. So I recently saw an example that had the torn litho. You could see the double-sided tape, but then it was stickered with the transition sticker, which made me figure that at some point at 43 Hannah, you must have been opening multi-packs and then putting them through the transition sticker machine. So I guess my question is, would you recall doing that, or like, you know, how long would that have happened before somebody else came along the line and said, we can't be packaging these with stickers if it's all torn? You know, like, how would that have come about?
So Matt's super specific question relates to in Canada, Sears packs. We find a lot of carded figures nowadays with the double tape rip, where you can see where they were taken apart in the pack. And Matt's seen online pictures of one of those ones. So it's got the rip down it. It was obviously taken out of a multi-pack, and then transition sticker that overlaps on top of the torn. So it was obviously put on afterwards. Do you know if those were part of the overstock you guys were putting in?
Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, I loved 3M adhesive transfer. You had it on a gun, and you just had to go like that, and you got a strip of tape, you know, double-sided tape. And it was so fast, you know. Remember what I said? I don't care the play value. I just want to get it out. So probably what happened is that they had inventory designated for Sears, Simpson Sears, and Sears could have ordered it and then rescinded the order or whatever. And so they took it apart and they wanted to put it into regular packs again, not knowing how strong adhesive transfer was.
And like I said, that's why I assumed that somebody in the factory would have said, you know, take all these, strip them apart, and re-sticker them. But then I would also assume that shortly after, quality control looked at them and said, we can't send these out.
I agree.
So I would assume that that would have been a very limited amount.
I agree. They would say, we have so many thousand of this, so many thousand of this item, so many thousand of this item. We want you to relabel them. And in that, one of those groups would be something coming from Simpson Sears. It was a multi-pack. And so the ladies knew they had to do it, so they started stripping them apart, and as soon as the inspector saw it, they stopped it.
No, so rare piece. We'll do one more question and then wrap up this one.
Question about Irwin Toys. Was there a company store or returns from vendors where you sell them at a discount to employees?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the question is, did Irwin have a company store? Kenner famously kind of definitely had a company store. You see a lot of stuff that comes out of that. But did Irwin have their own store for employees?
Yes. Yeah. And there were deals, especially around Christmas. The warehouse would open up and they would have stuff all over the floor. You could pick and get whatever you wanted. But if something was returned and it was only cosmetic, like, you know, the box was torn or something like that, and it wouldn't sell, it went through the company store and they would sell it there.
Interesting. Oh, I did not. Jim?
Can I ask Jim Swearingen one question?
You may ask one question.
Jim, was it your idea for the lightsabers on the first 12 to put them in the hand, or was there ever talk of, hey, we can stick a gun in their hands, why can't we stick a lightsaber?
No.
No?
We wanted the magic. That was
the reveal.
Yeah, so, but we turned it over to engineering. They could have done anything they wanted.
Gotcha.
And I don't know where Lucasfilm came in on that.
Right, okay.
But
Cool. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Jim, and Gord.
We got just one more mic.
Oh, okay. One more question, apparently.
This one's for Jimmy, actually, our collector, as a fan, and maybe to the whole panel as well. Like all those prototypes that we saw, is there any still undiscovered out there? And also in the production phase, like if we have errors, misprints, how did those occur? Like when were they discovered? Were they let go? You know, like a misprint or a backwards card or a reverse figure? How does that all happen?
All right, so we'll start first with Jim. What do you think is out there that's undiscovered? I think Jim Swearingen has mentioned a couple of things of his that haven't turned up yet.
Right. Well, yes, the most famous being the Kit Bash Boba Fett, right? That would sell for probably $5 million to $10 million today if it ever showed up. I think someone's put a bounty on it of a couple million if you could find it, but they would turn around and sell it for money. So that would be the number one. But I think Jim thinks it's been destroyed at the time. Did you use it for something else?
I'm holding it back until it's
Waiting for the right price.
Waiting for the right vacation to come out.
no. Most of the prototypes that I built would hang around doing, be beat up and stuff. And I really suspect that most of them are now in the trash somewhere. Because for a while, until 1991-ish, when Dave Okada left. After that, it was kind of open season. So I don't know whether the way it worked when all those little prototypes, the first figures that I did in the Boba Fett, they would go out to engineering and design, and then they would come back and be put in the morgue. We had a chain link, just like an evidence locker at a police station. All of our prototypes ended back in that cage, and you had to sign them in and out. And when Dave left, the signing in and signing out got a little loose. So there's always a chance that it's in somebody's, box somewhere. But chances are they're mostly destroyed, just because, everybody moved at least, a couple times during their career. So it's like, how much of that can you hold on to? So. And at the time, between 77 and 78, we were putting out toys. We weren't putting out collector stuff. So
That's right.
If only you had known, eh?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would have held on the rocket firing Boba Fetts I had, but it's likely never going to come up. But you never know. There's always hope. If I run into it, I'll let everybody know.
I bet you will.
I've been asked to duplicate it, but I've decided that's not a great idea.
I know that all the molds and tools at Irwin Toy were taken apart and reused on other different product lines. So people came and asked me years later, do you have any molds? Do you have any of this? Do you have any prototypes? Do you have any displays and stuff like that? We ran through so many different toys and stuff like that we took the molds apart and used the bases for other items.
All right. Well, yeah, I want to thank you guys. I think it's amazing. For most of us regular people, if you were up on a stage and people were asking you questions about what you did at work 40 years ago and like, why did you make this decision and all that sort of thing, you would have no clue to answer anything. So these guys have been really great, basically putting up with us. They'll be around. So if you have more questions, you can definitely ask them in person. That's the great thing about May the North, that we're a small, intimate convention, and you get to actually meet these guys. So we'll take a short break for a while, and then we'll be back to talk about Boba Fett. Thank you.